Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. And now the Saturday Crime Report. Castaic, California, December 2025. In California, a young girl had just turned 13. Like most youth, she spent a lot of time on the internet with no one knowing who she was talking to. Groomers and predators look for victims who they know are willful or disobedient or who don't listen to their parents, because that also means they don't talk to their parents very much either. The first move that all groomers try to do is to isolate their intended victims, which is made a lot easier when their victims don't tell their parents who they're associating with. This girl in particular was talking to a guy online, and it turns out that this was a grown man who instructed the girl to send him sexually explicit material, and he encouraged this person, a minor, via chat messages to engage in acts of self-harm, according to the criminal complaint. Obviously, this guy is a product of the dominant society. Now, the criminal complaint also goes on to state that this man talked the minor into establishing a Discord server where she could be filmed using blades to cut herself. Discord hasn't made any sort of comment on this because they don't want to alienate their core audience, or the people who run that sewer. On February 10th, the victim's mother contacted the FBI because she was concerned her daughter was being encouraged to harm herself by someone named Matthew. The victim had encountered Matthew on a Discord server related to individuals suffering from mental illness. On February 20th, Matthew flew across the country from Pennsylvania to Los Angeles to meet the victim. On that day, he met her near her home and took her to a motel in Castaic. At the very same time that was happening, the FBI had just left the girl's home after collecting her digital devices for inspection when the mother called to inform them that her daughter had run away and the girl's grandfather had found a suicide note. Agents then searched a phone number found in the girl's bedroom by her mother, which they were able to connect to 2 email addresses registered to Matthew, whom they identified as Matthew Edward Peischer. After obtaining location data for the phone, the FBI determined Peischer had flown from Pennsylvania to Los Angeles earlier that day and was now in Castaic, which is an unincorporated community located approximately 40 miles north of Los Angeles. Law enforcement then began to review surveillance footage from local motels and were able to find video of Peischer and the young girl entering a room at the Roadway Inn Motel. When law enforcement arrived at the motel, they encountered Peischer. The authorities also found the victim, identified in the complaint as Minor Victim 1, hiding in the bathroom. They also found bottles of lubricant on a nightstand, a knife, several razor blades, and bloody tissues. They also found a boarding pass for Peischer's flight from Philadelphia to Los Angeles. In addition to that, near Peischer's cell phone, they also found a Faraday bag, commonly used to block electronic signals. The girl told law enforcement that a female had driven her and Peischer to the hotel when he then cut her several times with a knife on her left and right forearms for approximately 15 minutes. He then had sexual intercourse with her, even though she said that she didn't want to. The girl also allegedly said that during intercourse, Peischer repeatedly choked her to the point that she couldn't speak. The girl also revealed that Peischer's plan was for them to go to the top of a big motel and jump off together. So the suicide note was definitely not a bluff. Alright, those are the details of the crime, but here's where things get really pale. Based on a review of the contents of the victim's smartphone and Peischer's own online activities, law enforcement believes that Matthew Peischer is associated with NVE ideology. NVE stands for Nihilistic Violent Extremist, which the feds call a growing threat to American families, that means white of course, and one of the most twisted and disturbing ideas to crawl out of the internet. Feds describe nihilistic violent extremists as individuals who engage in criminal conduct within the United States to further goals that derive mainly from a hatred of society and a desire to bring about its collapse by sowing indiscriminate chaos, destruction, and social instability. Gee, that sounds like these little white supremacists running around who call themselves accelerationists. You know, they call themselves that because, as far as they're concerned, American society has too many non-white people in it, and it has too many black people with rights, so American society is going to collapse, but they want to go ahead and accelerate that collapse while whites are still the majority, and as they see it, they will be able to reassert their dominance from cover of chaos. Every time there's some sort of large, wide-scale natural disaster in the United States, that's why you always have these stories of these white supremacists, many of them in the police departments, who are shooting at people, particularly black people. That's where this stuff comes from. As far as these guys are concerned, that's practice for the big show. That's where this NVE ideology draws from. The authorities also said these individuals often work as part of a network, such as the violent sexploitation group called 764. These violent online groups have allegedly abused hundreds of mostly female minor victims worldwide, according to Homeland Security. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's cyber tip line received more than 1,300 reports related to those online groups in 2024 alone. The criminal complaint against Peischer also details the nature of NVEs, including the 764 group. NVEs often target vulnerable individuals, including minors, and frequently use social media platforms to share child sexual abuse material or gore material or to groom victims toward committing acts of violence. NVEs and their members frequently extort or blackmail victims into complying with NVE demands, which vary but may include self-mutilation, online and in-person sexual acts, harm to animals, sexual exploitation of siblings and others, acts of violence and threats of violence, suicide, and even murder. Now, is anyone surprised that this creep Peischer came from one of these online sewers? Discord, 4chan, Reddit. Now, if any of these were black-owned or black-oriented, the feds would have already brought a case against the owners long ago. These are basically terrorist operations operating in cyberspace. These places are toilets, full and overflowing with crap. And you know this inbred-looking neo-Neanderthal was hanging out in the most racist places on Discord. The white media doesn't have to give details on that. We have more than enough examples from people just like him to know that's exactly what he's been doing. It's no coincidence that white supremacists have infested the internet since the days when it was a bunch of BBS boards back in the 1980s. Now, this Matthew Peischer character has since been charged only with travel with intent to engage in illicit sexual conduct. That's it. He faces up to 30 years in prison if convicted, but once again, white privilege has kicked in. He groomed this 13-year-old child before she turned 13. He then violated this child, mutilated her, and since he used a Faraday bag, that to my mind constitutes kidnapping because he deliberately wanted to make sure that if she tried to use a cell phone to call for help, or if someone tried to use her GPS signal for her phone to locate her, then the phone wouldn't work. And yet all the feds are throwing at him is merely intent to engage in illicit sexual conduct. Not even that he had done it, even though he did. But instead they're saying, well, he intended to. He hadn't actually done it, right? This is an important thing to note because the white media and white society's favorite narrative these days is that Jeffrey Epstein got away with what he did because he had a ton of money. That's the favorite line they like to use. Well, that's only these rich guys who do this stuff. But as I and others in the black media have documented for you for decades, there's mountains of monsters out there who have done the exact same things that Epstein was convicted for. In fact, things Epstein wasn't convicted of. And unlike Epstein, these other creeps didn't even see the inside of a prison cell. But none of them was wealthy or even rich. But what they were was the recipients of white privilege. And in this country, the laws are color-coded. The judges will sit in open court and tell the victims of these rapists that they don't want to ruin the lives of the rapists. And then these same corrupt judges will claim to be so even-handed with the sentences they hand down, when in reality, their rulings depend entirely on the color of the person who's on trial. And all the racist genetic dead-enders out there can get mad at me for pointing this out. But if the racists who infest the judicial system obeyed the law and stuck to it, well, then a lot of these whiners in the comments section would be in prison, that's what. That's why this happened. And of course, we all have to notice that this guy had a Faraday bag with him. What that tells me is clearly he was getting advice from all these reprobates that he cavorts with online. That's what it is. These kind of animals run in virtual packs, and they love to go ahead and swap tips with each other about the best way to kidnap people, the best way to make sure that you neutralize people's communication devices so that you got them completely isolated. That's what they do. They sit around practicing this stuff. They sit around fantasizing about it. They sit around just devising ways of, oh, when I kill somebody, this is how I'd like to do it. So let me go ahead and prepare in my mind before I go ahead and do it for real. That's what happens in white supremacist culture. And you know, the behavior of this Peischer creep reminds me of another degenerate, that racist judge from the Dylann Roof trial, Benjamin Gosnell, who in open court said that Dylann Roof and his family were the real victims of the Mother Emanuel Church massacre. Gosnell, you'll recall, has since been indicted for having violated a child, among other demonic crimes. And they found out that this disgraced racist judge had been online, just like Dylann Roof, just like this Peischer individual. And in one conversation with a fellow pedophile, Gosnell planned to visit the man in Florida, where the two of them had already set up to jointly rape and torture the infant son of a family member of the other man. The court filings also say that Gosnell was romantically involved with this pedophile, too. So we got degeneracy on top of degeneracy. These creeps are online organizing child rape rings. This is the culture of white supremacy. This is white supremacist culture. You have a grown man hunting for preteen victims on the internet, and a former judge who is engaged in every type of evil imaginable against babies. This is white supremacy. This is what we're fighting against, and this is why they cannot be changed. Of course, they're bestial animals toward black people. Look at what these racists do against their own children. And this Peischer creep, he is a devious little scumbag, but sadly, he's not unique. He's quite typical in this regard. I suppose we should count our blessings, though. For this degenerate, it was either this or go shoot up a school. You know that was his plan B. His kind can always be counted on for that. And of course, we have to add that the place where this typical mayhem took place has a population of around 19,000 people. This was not some huge urban center. The suburbs, the rural areas, that's where this kind of carnage takes place because the white media does not dare ask any questions that might embarrass the dominant society. And because of that, they have their children disappearing left and right, or their bodies being found mutilated somewhere, or they wind up striking up an online friendship with some demonic psychopathic 4chan Reddit Discord user who talks them into mutilating themselves and then running off secretly with them for what turns out to be a murder-suicide plot, with them as the murder victim. This is satanic. This is evil. This is white supremacy. And it's the kind of thing that the white media doesn't want you to know about, because how many of them have been found in the Epstein files? How many of them glorify people like this Peischer character? How many of them are good friends with the Benjamin Gosnells of this world? Black parents in particular, you need to be aware of what your children are doing online and who they're talking to. This is not a game. These white supremacist terrorist groups who organize online are always trying to find some new way to trick somebody. Who are they hunting for? Let's find some sort of forum that deals with people wrestling with mental illness, and let's try to find the youngest person there. There is nothing that these white supremacists will not take and twist and pervert into a tool of their degeneracy. And while the so-called authorities are actually dedicated to protecting reprobates like this, you need to make sure that if you're a black parent or even grandparent, like in this story, you are dedicated to protecting your black children. And that's this week's Saturday Crime Report. Keep your eyes open and stay on alert, because there's a lot worse criminals out there than the ones the white corporate media chooses to show you. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Suleiman Alaji, Alice Ransom, E-Rock, Matthew Liggins, and D. Sherrod. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.